I'm Eric Ham, and we're live in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. And over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the United States and around the world, covering all the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines. An Air India flight bound for London carrying 242 passengers crashes into a residential area just moments after taking off from Ahmedabad in western India, killing more than 210 people. Beijing condemns what it calls dangerous behavior by a Japanese military plane over the Pacific after Tokyo says Chinese fighter jets flew unusually close to its aircraft over the weekend. Vietnam's National Assembly approves plans to merge provinces and cities, slashing nearly 80,000 state jobs as part of a major reform to the country's administrative structure. European Union countries give a final approval to new tariffs on fertilizer imports from Russia, a move that aims to stifle Moscow's war efforts in Ukraine, but one that has upset some European farmers. And crypto exchange Binance says it will allow users in Syria to trade in cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, on the platform following the U.S. decision to lift sanctions on the country last month. Tensions in Los Angeles have hit a boiling point as protests against immigration and customs enforcement intensify and spread across the country. What began as local outrage over immigration raids has now ignited a national crisis, pitting President Donald Trump against California Governor Gavin Newsom in a constitutional standoff.
Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets illegally and for no reason. Donald Trump's government isn't protecting our communities. They're traumatizing our communities. And that seems to be the entire point.
For 6 straight days, protesters had filled downtown LA with demonstrations ranging from peaceful marches to violent clashes. Last night, as a second curfew took effect, crowds surged through Grand Park and the Civic Center, with some protesters hurling fireworks and rocks at officers, while others were less hostile outside City Hall.
Over these videos of children.
Somebody gave me one just in case.
No justice, no peace. These ICE raids are part of a larger racist systemic issue. People are being swept off the streets, swept off their places of work, off their homes. Families are being ripped apart. Our most vulnerable are being targeted and discriminated based on the color of their skin and immigration status.
Now, in response to the demonstrations, President Trump has deployed 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 U.S. Marines to the city, a move fiercely opposed by Governor Newsom and L.A. Mayor Karen Bass.
So my message to you is, if you do not live or work in downtown L.A., avoid the area. Law enforcement will arrest individuals who break the curfew, and you will be prosecuted.
However, despite their objections, the military forces were federalized under Title X and placed under a special task force. The Marines are expected to join National Guard personnel on the streets within 48 hours following training in crowd control and de-escalation tactics.
The district attorney's office equally will fiercely protect people's rights to peacefully assemble and peacefully engage in First Amendment protected speech. However, when that speech crosses over from protected speech into illegal conduct, the people who engage in that illegal conduct will be prosecuted. They will first be arrested, they will be prosecuted, and they will be punished to the full extent of the law.
Now, under Title 10, these forces are restricted from law enforcement duties, but are allowed to protect federal property and personnel, meaning they may temporarily detain individuals who interfere with federal operations, but must hand over custody to civilian police. The Department of Homeland Security has made it clear if ICE agents are attacked, military personnel can, in fact, intervene.
The mission in Los Angeles, as you know well, sir, is not about lethality. It's about maintaining law and order on behalf of law enforcement agents who deserve to do their job without being attacked by mobs of people. And so we're very proud that the National Guard and the Marines are on the streets defending the ICE agents, and they will continue to do that.
And now, in the meantime, a legal storm is also brewing. Governor Newsom has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration, accusing it of violating state sovereignty by deploying the military without proper justification. California is now seeking a temporary restraining order to halt the deployments, and a federal court hearing is scheduled for Thursday in San Francisco. The president has defended the action, claiming it was necessary to prevent quote-unquote total anarchy. At an event in Washington, the president was met with cheers and boos, but even then, he defended his stance, saying, and I quote, "If I didn't act quickly, Los Angeles would be burning to the ground," end quote.
We had to go in to save a lot of ICE officers, as you know, who were held up. They were holed up in a building, and they were being attacked. And the military went in, the National Guard went in and got them. The police weren't able, unfortunately, to move fast enough, but we moved fast enough. And while we were there, we stayed there, and we stopped tremendous destruction and death.
Meanwhile, arrests are mounting. In Pennsylvania, a local resident filmed a large group of ICE agents surrounding a man who appeared to be in restraints. The residents shouted shame at their agents, many of whom were masked.
Shame! I mean, there's all of you, shame! Every single one of you, shame! 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 Every single one of you, shame!
Across the country, cities like Spokane, Washington, and Santa Ana, California have declared curfews following similar demonstrations and confrontations with ICE. So as the cities brace for another wave of unrest and a court prepares to rule on the legality of military deployment, it remains unclear just how far the White House is prepared to go in the name of law and order. Now we shift focus to the East Coast, where a wave of protests are gaining momentum ahead of what could be one of the biggest days of national defiance this year. As Los Angeles and other cities remain on edge following intense demonstrations earlier this week, attention now turns to the upcoming No Kings protests set to unfold in nearly 2,000 locations across the country on Saturday. These rallies are timed to directly counter a military parade in Washington, D.C., celebrating the Army's 250th anniversary, a spectacle that also falls on President Donald Trump's 79th birthday and Flag Day. The protest, coordinated by the 50501 movement, aimed to reject what organizers describe as rising authoritarianism and billionaire-centric policies under the Trump administration. And the name 50501 represents 50 states, 50 protests, one movement, a unified stand across the nation. Now, according to the No Kings website, the demonstration's theme is rooted in the belief that President Trump's leadership resembles that of a monarch rather than a democratically elected president.
They've defied our courts, deported Americans, disappeared people off the streets, attacked our civil rights, and slashed our services. They've done this all while continuing to serve and enrich their billionaire allies.
Now, while Washington, D.C. will in fact host the parade, no protests are scheduled in the nation's capital. Instead, organizers are intentionally shifting focus away from D.C. The flagship rally will actually be held in Philadelphia to offer what organizers call a people-powered alternative to the taxpayer-funded military celebration in Washington.
It are Democrats saying they want to reclaim the American flag. It's also being titled No King's Day. Does the president see himself as a king?
This is a constitutional republic, and we want to see all of our citizens be proud of the country in which they are given the privilege and the blessing to live. And I think that those images of foreign flags being waved with, by illegal criminals and by violent rioters in the face of cars blowing up and of flames in the city.
Now, organizers insist that all No Kings events are firmly committed to nonviolence. In fact, participants are instructed to attend the protest with someone known, remove facial recognition from their phones, and refrain from bringing any weapons of any kind. They're also being equipped with digital toolkits and invited to attend training calls, including a mandatory host meeting and martial training to ensure the events stay organized and peaceful. While immigration is not the core focus of Saturday's protest, advocacy groups have cautioned undocumented individuals about participating due to safety risk. Still, the energy building around the No King's Day of Defiance is undeniable, and organizers claim this will be the largest single-day mobilization since President Trump returned to office.
We do not want to give Trump an excuse to crack down on peaceful protests, which is exactly what he wants to do. We don't want to give him some sort of narrative excuse to say protesters are protesting the military. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, power depends on the people. It flows from the people. It depends on the consent of the governed, and on Saturday we're going to show up to make that point very clear.
And as tanks roll into D.C. and flags wave high, all eyes would be on the streets, not just for celebrations, but for the resistance rising just out of view. And staying with the White House, President Donald Trump has ordered the movement of U.S. personnel out of the Middle East as nuclear talks with Iran stall and tensions continue to rise. Washington has also reportedly authorized a partial evacuation from its embassy in Iraq and cleared the voluntary departure of non-essential personnel and family members from Bahrain and Kuwait, citing security concerns. The State Department says the action is precautionary to protect Americans abroad.
Well, they are being moved out because it could be a dangerous place, and we'll see what happens. But we've given notice to move out, and we'll see what happens.
The troop movement follows a warning from Tehran on Wednesday, which threatened to strike U.S. bases if a conflict should break out.
God willing, it won't come to that, and the talks will yield results. But if they don't, and conflict is imposed on us, the enemy's losses will undoubtedly be greater than ours. In that case, America will have to leave the region because all its bases are within our reach. We have access to them, and without hesitation, we will target all of them in the host countries.
Now, the U.S. has maintained a military presence in the region for decades. In fact, its largest base in Qatar, with troops in Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. U.S. forces are also stationed in Syria, Iraq, and Jordan, while strategic bases in Djibouti and Turkey support regional operations. In fact, some of these bases have come under attack before, most notably in January of 2020 when Iran launched missiles at U.S. positions in Iraq, retaliating for the strike that killed a top Iranian general near the Baghdad airport. But while operations continue normally, U.S. Central Command says it's monitoring developments closely, noting that Pentagon Secretary Pete Hegseth has authorized the departure of dependents from multiple locations. Now, the movement comes amid a stalemate in nuclear negotiations between Washington and Tehran, primarily over uranium enrichment. A sixth round of talks is set for this weekend in Oman, but in an interview released on Wednesday, President Trump expressed doubts on whether Iran would agree to halt its uranium enrichment. Tehran and Washington have held 5 rounds of talks since April to hash out a nuclear deal to replace the 2015 accord that the president abandoned during his first term in office. However, Trump has increasingly signaled that he is losing patience.
They won't be enriching. If they enrich, then we're going to have to do it the other way, and I don't really want to do it the other way, but we're going to have to.
What's your latest?
There's not going to be enrichment.
Iran currently enriches uranium to 60%, far above the 3.67% limit set in the 2015 deal, and close, though still short of the 90% needed for a nuclear warhead. Western countries have long accused Iran of seeking to acquire atomic weapons, but Tehran has insisted its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. With troops on the move from the region and diplomacy on edge, the stakes could not be higher. As talks in Oman loom, the window for a peaceful resolution is narrowing. And with both sides digging in over uranium enrichment, the possibility of a breakthrough now hangs in the balance. Now we shift to Europe, where President Vladimir Putin is calling for a new long-term military strategy that could shape Russia's defense plans through 2036. He says the war in Ukraine, along with other regional conflicts, has exposed critical gaps, starting with nuclear readiness. The call comes as international pressure builds on Moscow to end the war in Ukraine. But Russia is pushing ahead, discussing modernization across the board, from ground forces to strategic bombers. Our next report gets you all the details on the Russian president's latest defense directive.
As the war in Ukraine grinds on and Western pressure builds to end it, Russian President Vladimir Putin refuses to back down. Instead, he is charting a new course for his military, a strategic reboot set to reportedly unfold between 2027 and 2036. And at the core of it lies one priority: nuclear superiority. On June 11th in Moscow, at a meeting with military and defense officials, President Putin outlined his vision for a new state armament program that would draw lessons from Ukraine and other war zones.
Today, our task is to formulate a new long-term program for the entire range of systems and types of weapons, including, and first of all, promising ones, and to make maximum use of the experience of the special military operation and various regional conflicts for this purpose.
The plan is sweeping, covering everything from ground tactics to missile systems. But Putin singled out one area for special attention: Russia's nuclear triad.
Special attention should be paid to the nuclear triad, which was and remains the guarantor of Russia's sovereignty and plays a key role in ensuring the balance of power in the world.
To put this in perspective, a nuclear triad is a military strategy involving a country's ability to deliver nuclear weapons via three distinct methods: land-based missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and strategic bombers from the air. Russia is allegedly estimated to possess over 1,700 deployed nuclear warheads, supported by a triad including 330 intercontinental ballistic missiles, 12 ballistic missile submarines equipped with 192 missiles, and 58 strategic bombers. President Putin claims 95% of strategic nuclear systems are state-of-the-art.
Currently, the share of modern weapons and equipment in the strategic nuclear forces is already 95%. This is a good indicator. In fact, this is the highest of all the nuclear powers in the world, the highest indicator.
But the nuclear triad is just one part of a broader push. Putin reportedly believes Russia's ground forces must also be equipped for higher mobility, more automation, and flexible upgrade options. The Air Force and Navy too are being drawn into this plan. The Russian president wants new aircraft orders and maintenance support.
The state program being formed must provide for a set of systemic and consistent measures for the creation and purchase of aircraft and air weapons for the needs of the Russian armed forces, modernization and repair of aircraft and air weapons.
This ambitious modernization drive comes at a time of strain. Russia's defense industry is allegedly under pressure, blocked from Western tech and strained by war demand. Reports allegedly claim Russia's military losses are also climbing amid the prolonged war. Despite that, strikes have continued on Ukrainian cities, the most recent being an attack on Kharkiv. In the backdrop of all this, President Putin's message is clear: Russia is digging in for the long haul. With a multi-year strategy now in the works, and nuclear readiness taking center stage, the Kremlin is doubling down hard on power, even as global pressure mounts for a ceasefire.
And we end today in South America, where Bolivia remains on edge, with streets across the country witnessing violence. Supporters of former President Evo Morales have refused to back down, and what started as protests demanding Morales' candidacy for national elections in August, despite a constitutional disqualification, has snowballed into a wider revolt against President Luis Arce and the economic crisis. On Wednesday, at least 3 policemen were killed in clashes as protesters launched explosives in a Bolivian town. While the president and the former president remain engaged in a power battle, Bolivian cities burn, and it's the people that suffer the most. Here's the story with more.
City streets on fire. Highways blocked. Tear gas, explosions, and hundreds of protesters clashing with police in riot gear. Bolivia is on the edge. Supporters of former President Evo Morales launched nationwide protests demanding him to be qualified as a candidate for the next presidential elections in August, for which he is constitutionally disqualified. But now, these protests have turned violent and snowballed into a wider revolt against President Luis Arce and the economic crisis in Bolivia. In Lagua, a mining town in Bolivia's southwest, at least 2 police officers were killed and several people were injured as violent clashes erupted. The government says the policemen were murdered by gunshots. At least 15 civilians and 2 police officers were injured in confrontations in the town the previous day.
In response to the recent violent events recorded in the municipality of Lagua, as well as in other parts of our country that have left injured and deceased people and police officers, the public ministry has immediately initiated investigations and has deployed actions that allow the identification and criminal prosecution of the material and intellectual authors.
By Wednesday, there were at least 21 blockade points across roads and highways in the country. These were led by the supporters of Morales.
We have instructed the Bolivian police through our Minister of Government and our armed forces through our Minister of Defense to conduct an operation to unblock the Oruro-Cochabamba highway. This action is to address all demands and the clamorous request we see from the Bolivian people that these blockades are affecting their pockets and our population. All they intend is to reiterate an unconstitutional candidacy of Mr. Evo Morales. We regret that once again personal interests are affecting the life and economy of the Bolivian people.
In Cochabamba, which is Morales' political stronghold, clashes broke out after President Luis Arce ordered the clearing of the highways. Protesters used explosives, while the police responded with tear gas. Evo Morales was Bolivia's first indigenous president and is one of Latin America's longest-serving leaders. He led the country from 2006 to 2019. He resigned under pressure from the military after seeking to extend his 13-year-old grip on power and went into exile. Morales returned to the country a year later and backed Luis Arce, the current president. The two, however, soon turned rivals. Evo Morales still retains a large following in the South American country, particularly among the indigenous communities. Now, Morales wants to be back in power. But Bolivia's constitution upholds the 2-term limit for its leaders. He has managed to evade this rule previously, so he is trying his luck again. Last month, he attempted to register as a candidate but failed.
They have removed the prosecutors. Now the plan is to remove doctors and teachers, then leave us without electricity, without entel, without water. Luis Arce's government is acting like Donald Trump in Palestine. What is happening is very serious. I want the Bolivian people to know.
He has been holed up in his central stronghold in the Cochabamba department since October to avoid arrest on charges of trafficking a minor. The government says this is where he has been sowing chaos from and has put him under investigation for terrorism, inciting protests, and for trying to sabotage the election.
WhatsApp audio messages are making the rounds on social media, inciting violence and unrest in the hope of enabling someone who, by constitutional mandate and by order of the Constitutional Court, is disqualified from office. They say that without that person there will be no elections. I believe we are all interested in a democratic and peaceful transfer of power.
The years-long rivalry between Morales and Arce has crushed Bolivia's economy. High inflation, fuel, and food shortages are paralyzing the country. So, while the leaders remain focused on power play, it is the people of Bolivia who continue to suffer.
That's First Post America for today. We certainly thank all of you for tuning in. We hope to see you again tomorrow. Thanks everyone for watching.
First Post now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
Stands at $36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor,
Hindi,
$30 trillion kakarjo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Sekali radikali.
Japanese, Portuguese,
Por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select the language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. First Post.